The first alien ship appeared over Washington, D.C. on a Tuesday morning in March, casting a shadow that stretched from the Capitol building to the Lincoln Memorial. It hung there like a dark promise, silent and still, while the world held its breath. I was in my lab at MIT when the emergency broadcasts began. Dr. Sarah Chen, theoretical physicist and apparently humanity's newest nightmare, dropped her coffee mug when the news anchor's voice cracked with barely controlled panic. Ladies and gentlemen, we're receiving reports that similar objects have appeared over Beijing, Moscow, London, and 12 other major cities worldwide. The objects appear to be approximately 2 miles in diameter and are maintaining a steady altitude of. The broadcast cut to static. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Dr. Chen? The voice was crisp, military. This is General Morrison. You're needed in Washington. Now. 3 hours later, I was in the Pentagon's basement, surrounded by the kind of people who usually existed only in conspiracy theories. The room buzzed with controlled chaos, military officials barking orders, scientists hunched over laptops, and in the center of it all, a massive screen displaying satellite imagery of the ships. 17 vessels, General Morrison was saying to the assembled crowd. All identical. All silent. They arrived simultaneously at 0847 Eastern Standard Time and haven't moved since. Have we tried communicating? Asked Dr. James Wright, a colleague from the SETI Institute. Every frequency, every protocol we know. Nothing. Morrison's jaw was tight. But that's not why you're here. The screen changed, showing a new image that made my stomach drop. It was a satellite photo of what looked like Earth, but it was wrong. Continents were misshapen, oceans were different colors, and massive geometric structures dotted the surface. We received this transmission exactly 1 hour ago, Morrison continued. It appears to be our planet. But not as it is now. Dr. Wright leaned forward. You think it's a prediction? A threat, Morrison replied grimly. Which brings us to why you're all here. They've made their intentions clear. We need to respond. I stared at the image, my mind racing. The structures looked almost organic, like they'd grown from the Earth itself. But there was something about their placement, their geometric perfection, that spoke of intelligence. Not human intelligence. What kind of response are we talking about? I asked. Morrison's smile was cold. The only kind we know how to give. The next 72 hours passed in a blur of briefings, preparations, and increasingly desperate phone calls home. The aliens, because that's what we were calling them now, remained silent. But their presence was felt everywhere. The stock markets crashed. Religious leaders declared everything from the second coming to the end times. Riots broke out in major cities. And through it all, the ships waited. I found myself assigned to something called Project Mirror, a hastily assembled think tank tasked with understanding the alien transmission. We worked in shifts, analyzing every pixel, every distortion, every shadow in that impossible image of Earth. It's not random, I told the team during one of our midnight sessions. Look at the placement of these structures. They're positioned at specific geological points, tectonic boundaries, volcanic hotspots, magnetic anomalies. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, a geologist from Caltech, nodded grimly. If you wanted to destabilize a planet's ecosystem, you'd hit exactly these points, I finished. The realization settled over the room like a cold weight. This wasn't just a threat, it was a blueprint. On day 4, everything changed. I was grabbing coffee in the Pentagon cafeteria when the building shook. Not the gentle tremor of a passing truck, but a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Emergency alarms blared as I ran back to the command center. The screen showed chaos. The ships were moving. They're ascending, someone reported. All vessels are gaining altitude. How fast? Steady rate of weight. The technician's voice cracked. They're stopping. 200,000 feet and holding. General Morrison was already on multiple phones. I want every missile battery online. Every aircraft in the air. Now. I watched the tactical display update in real time.
Red dots representing our military assets converged on the alien positions like antibodies responding to an infection.
Fighter jets screamed through the skies while missile batteries locked onto targets.
"This is it," Morrison announced to the room. "We're going to show them what humanity is capable of."
The first wave launched at 1,437 hours. 12 nuclear-tipped intercontinental ballistic missiles, our most powerful weapons, streaking toward the nearest alien ship. We watched their trajectories on the main screen, perfect arcs of human engineering and destructive power. The missiles reached their target and simply stopped. They hung in the air around the alien vessel like ornaments, their engines still firing but making no progress. Then, one by one, they began to dissolve. Not explode, it dissolve, breaking apart at the molecular level until nothing remained but empty air. "Sir," the communications officer's voice was barely above a whisper.
"We're receiving a transmission. On screen."
The image that appeared made my blood run cold.
It wasn't the geometric perfection we'd seen before. It was us.
The Pentagon Command Center, viewed from above, with perfect clarity.
They were watching us watch them. Then came the voice. It wasn't words, exactly.
It was meaning, understanding that bypassed language entirely and planted itself directly in our minds. When it spoke, every person in that room heard it in their native tongue, in their own internal voice.
"Your weapons do not frighten us. We have seen them before, on 1,000 worlds. Always the same response. Always the same futility."
General Morrison stepped forward, his face flushed with anger.
"Then what do you want? We are the convergence. We bring order to chaos, purpose to randomness. Your species has been evaluated and found lacking." The image on the screen shifted, showing that distorted Earth again.
But now it was moving, changing, the geometric structures growing and spreading like a time-lapse video of infection.
"In 67 of your rotations, the transformation will begin. Your resistance is noted and dismissed." The transmission ended. The screens went dark.
Silence filled the command center for exactly 13 seconds.
Then everyone started talking at once. "Try conventional weapons. Coordinate with other nations. Evacuate the major cities. Enough."
Morrison's voice cut through the chaos.
"We have 67 days. I want options. Real options. Not panic." But I wasn't listening anymore.
Something about the alien's message was bothering me, a nagging feeling that I was missing something important. I pulled out my laptop and started reviewing our analysis of the original transmission.
67 days. Why that specific number? And why tell us at all?
If they were as powerful as they seemed, why not just do it?
"Dr. Chen." Morrison was suddenly beside me. "I need your people working on defensive scenarios. Anything that might protect our population centers."
"General," I said slowly, still staring at my screen.
"What if we're approaching this wrong?" "What do you mean?"
"They said our weapons don't frighten them."
"They've seen them before." "But what if they haven't seen everything we're capable of?" Morrison frowned.
"Our weapons are the most advanced."
"Not our weapons," I interrupted. "Our minds." That night, I couldn't sleep.
I sat in my temporary quarters, surrounded by printouts and equations, trying to understand what made us different. The aliens had conquered other worlds, that much was clear.
But they'd given us a countdown. They'd warned us. Why? The answer came to me at 3 a.m. in that strange clarity that sometimes emerges from exhaustion and desperation. They were curious.
I burst into the command center, still in my pajamas, clutching a folder full of hastily scribbled notes.
"We need to talk to them," I announced to the night shift. Commander Phillips, Morrison's deputy, looked up from his coffee. "Dr. Chen, it's 3 in the morning." "They're scientists," I continued, ignoring his tone. "Think about it.
They could have destroyed us the moment they arrived.
Instead, they showed us a preview. They gave us a timeline. They're studying us. So, So we give them something to study.
I spent the next day building my case, pulling together every piece of evidence I could find. The positioning of their ships, perfectly placed to observe maximum population centers. The specificity of their timeline, exactly enough time for us to mount a response. The fact that they'd bothered to communicate at all.
By evening, I had General Morrison's attention. You're suggesting we, what? Surrender?
I'm suggesting we do what humanity does best, I replied.
We surprise them.
The plan I proposed was insane. It was also the only idea that made sense. Instead of fighting them with weapons, we would fight them with imagination. Every species they've encountered responded with violence, I explained to the assembled team.
It's probably the most predictable response in the universe. But what if we didn't? What if we did something they've never seen before?
Like what?
Dr. Wright asked.
I took a deep breath.
We create. The next 60 days were unlike anything in human history.
Operation Renaissance, as it came to be called, wasn't a military campaign, it was an explosion of human creativity on a scale never before attempted. Every artist, every writer, every musician, every dreamer was invited to contribute. We broadcast constantly to the alien ships, not demands or threats, but symphonies and paintings, poetry and dance, mathematical proofs that looked like fractals and fractals that solved like equations. The response was unexpected. On day 47, the ships began to move again. Not ascending or descending, but rotating, orienting themselves to better receive our transmissions. When we sent up Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, they repositioned themselves into a formation that mirrored the harmonic structure of the music. When a group of children from a Denver elementary school sent up their drawings of what they imagine alien families might look like, one of the ships actually descended, just a few thousand feet, but enough to acknowledge the gesture.
They're listening, Dr. Reeves whispered during one of our daily briefings.
More than that, I replied, watching the ship's latest configuration on the tactical display.
They're learning.
But the real breakthrough came on day 55.
A young programmer named Marcus Webb had an idea. Instead of sending our creations to the aliens, why not invite them to create with us?
He developed a simple mathematical language, universal concepts like prime numbers and geometric progressions, and used it to pose questions. Not demands for information, but genuine inquiries about their understanding of beauty, of meaning, of purpose. The response came back in the same mathematical language, but it was more than we'd hoped for.
It was elegant, creative, beautiful. They weren't just answering our questions, they were asking their own.
My God, Dr. Wright breathed as we decoded their latest transmission.
They want to know about music.
They're asking how we create emotional responses through organized sound. I stared at the mathematical poetry flowing across our screens.
We're having a conversation. The final breakthrough came on day 66. 24 hours before their deadline.
I was in the command center when the primary alien ship, the one over Washington, began broadcasting. Not the direct mind-to-mind communication they'd used before, but something new. Visual patterns that seemed to move and shift, accompanied by sounds that were almost music but followed no earthly rules.
What is it? Morrison asked.
I watched the patterns evolve, recognizing something in their structure that made my heart race. It's art, I whispered.
They're making art. The broadcast continued for 17 hours. As it played, something extraordinary happened.
The other ships began adding to it, each one contributing their own variations, their own interpretations of the theme. What had started as a single voice became a chorus, a symphony of minds creating something that had never existed before. When it ended, silence filled the command center. Then came the voice, gentle now, almost wondering.
You are different.
General Morrison stepped forward.
Does this mean? Your weapons we understand.
They speak of fear, of competition, of the desire to survive at any cost. We have seen this pattern repeated across the galaxy.
But your minds.
There was something like awe in the mental voice. Your minds create beauty from nothing. Purpose from chaos. You find meaning where none exists and then share it freely with others, even with those who would destroy you. The image on the screen changed again. Not the distorted Earth we'd seen before, but our Earth, beautiful, blue, alive, surrounded by the alien ships in a new formation. Protective instead of threatening. We came to bring order. But you have shown us something we had forgotten. The universe is not about order. It is about possibility. I felt tears on my cheeks and didn't care. What happens now? I asked. Now we learn from each other. Your species will continue to grow, to create, to imagine. And we will remember how to wonder. The ships didn't leave. Instead, they began to change, their perfect geometric forms softening, becoming more organic, more alive. Docking bays opened, and smaller craft emerged, not weapons, but workshops, laboratories, galleries. The first alien to set foot on Earth looked nothing like the creatures from our movies. It was tall and graceful, with features that seemed to shift and flow like liquid mercury. But when it saw the crowd of humans waiting at the landing site, it did something unexpected. It smiled. We have much to show each other, it said in perfectly accented English. But first, we would like to hear more of this thing you call music. 6 months later, I stood in what had once been the Pentagon's war room, now converted into a collaborative workspace where humans and aliens worked side by side on projects that would have been pure fantasy just a year before. The walls were covered with equations that looked like poetry and paintings that solved mathematical theorems. Marcus Webb had just finished demonstrating a new form of interactive art that responded to both human emotions and alien thought patterns. The being he was working with, they called themselves keepers of the pattern, had contributed a harmonic structure that somehow made the colors sing. Dr. Chen? General Morrison approached, looking remarkably relaxed for a man who'd spent his career preparing for war. The president wants an update on the joint research initiatives. Tell her we're making progress, I replied, watching a group of human children teach alien younglings how to play jump rope. Better than progress. We're making friends. Morrison chuckled. You know, when this all started, I thought we were facing an invasion. We were, I said. An invasion of possibilities. Through the window, I could see the alien ships orbiting peacefully overhead, their forms now beautiful in ways that human and alien aesthetics had combined to create. They were no longer weapons of conquest but symbols of cooperation, proof that the universe was vast enough for countless forms of intelligence to thrive together. The convergence had come to bring order, but in the end, we had taught them something more valuable. We had shown them that chaos could be beautiful, that difference was not something to be eliminated but celebrated, and that the greatest creations came not from the imposition of will but from the marriage of minds. They had feared our weapons because weapons were familiar. Every species fought. Every species built tools of destruction. But minds that created art from suffering, beauty from chaos, hope from despair, that was something new under the stars. As I watched the sunset paint the sky in colors that no human artist had ever imagined, colors that our new friends had taught us to see, I realized that this was just the beginning. Together, we would explore galaxies not as conquerors but as creators, spreading not order but possibility to every corner of the universe. The greatest weapon humanity possessed wasn't nuclear fire or genetic engineering or artificial intelligence. It was imagination. It was the stubborn, beautiful, impossible refusal to accept that things had to be the way they were. And in the end, that had made all the difference. The story made headlines across the world, First Contact, How Art Saved the World. But for those of us who lived through it, the real headline was simpler and more profound: we are not alone, and that's beautiful. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves published a paper 6 months after First Contact titled Xenogeology and the Art of Planetary Composition. In it, she described how alien technology wasn't just functional, it was aesthetic, with every tool and structure designed to enhance the beauty of its environment rather than merely exploit it. Dr. James Wright's SETI Institute was transformed into something called the Institute for Interstellar Communication, focusing not on detecting alien signals but on developing new forms of artistic and mathematical collaboration between species. His first joint project with the Keepers resulted in a form of music that could only be fully appreciated by multiple types of consciousness working together. Marcus Webb became the first human ambassador to the Convergence Fleet, traveling between ships to facilitate cultural exchange programs. His mathematical poetry became a new universal language, capable of expressing concepts that had never existed in either human or alien thought alone. General Morrison retired from the military and became the director of the Earth Convergence Defense Initiative, not defense against the aliens, but joint defense of the principles we discovered together. The idea that diversity of thought was not just valuable but essential for any civilization that wanted to truly thrive. As for me, I returned to MIT, but my lab was no longer just a place for physics research. It had become something unprecedented, a space where human and alien minds worked together to explore questions that neither species could have asked alone. The first question we tackled was one that had been bothering me since that first night in the Pentagon: why had they given us a countdown at all? The answer, when it came, was beautiful in its simplicity. "We have conquered many worlds," explained Kethvar, my primary alien research partner. "But conquest is not growth. We learned to fear resistance because resistance taught us nothing new. But you did not resist. You created. And in your creation, we found not just new ideas, but new ways of thinking about ideas. So the countdown was a test. But not the kind your General Morrison thought. We needed to know if you were capable of choosing creation over destruction even when facing annihilation. Many species cannot. I thought about all the worlds they'd mentioned, all the civilizations that had met them with weapons and fear. What happened to them?" Kethvar's form shimmered in what I'd learned was their equivalent of a sad smile. "They became very good at building weapons. But they forgot how to build wonders." That conversation took place on a Tuesday morning in September, exactly 1 year after the ships first appeared. Outside my window, the sky was filled with impossible architecture, structures that served no purpose except to be beautiful, designed jointly by human artists and alien engineers. Children played in parks that existed in dimensions we hadn't known were possible until our new friends taught us to see them. Musicians performed concerts that reached across light years, their melodies harmonizing with songs from distant worlds. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. There were still those who wanted to study alien technology for military applications, still politicians who saw opportunity for exploitation rather than collaboration. But they were outnumbered now by the dreamers and creators, by everyone who had looked up at those ships and chosen to see possibility instead of threat. "Dr. Chen?" One of my students approached, a young woman named Lisa Park who was working on her thesis about interdimensional mathematics as artistic expression. "The convergence ship is ready for the next phase of the consciousness bridging experiment." I smiled. The consciousness bridging project was our most ambitious undertaking yet, an attempt to create a temporary mental link between human and alien minds, allowing for direct sharing of thoughts and experiences. It was dangerous, unprecedented, and absolutely necessary if we wanted to take the next step in our collaboration. "Are you ready?" I asked Lisa. She nodded, though I could see the nervousness in her eyes. "It's just, what if we can't find our way back? What if we lose ourselves in their thoughts?" It was a valid concern. Early experiments had shown that human and alien consciousness were far more different than we'd initially understood. Where human thoughts moved in linear patterns, alien minds existed in vast, interconnected webs of meaning. Where we experienced time as a sequence, they experienced it as a symphony. "Then we'll be lost together," I said. "And maybe that's exactly where we need to be." The consciousness bridging chamber was located in the heart of the convergence ship that had taken up permanent residence over MIT. The space itself defied description, walls that curved through dimensions we couldn't name, air that tasted of concepts rather than elements, gravity that responded to intention as much as mass. Kethvar was waiting for us, along with 2 other members of the Convergence Collective. Their forms had stabilized into shapes that human eyes could process, but I knew that was an accommodation for our benefit. In their natural state, they were patterns of living thought, consciousness given form through will and purpose. "The bridge will last only moments in your time perception," Kethvar explained as we took our positions around the central nexus. "But those moments may feel like eternities. Do not try to maintain your individual identity. Instead, allow yourself to become part of something larger." I lay back on the platform, feeling the alien technology interface with my nervous system. It wasn't invasive, more like a gentle invitation, a request to open doors I hadn't known existed.
Beginning consciousness merge in 3, 2, 1. The world exploded into meaning.
I was still Sarah Chen, but I was also Kethvar, and through Kethvar I was connected to every member of the Convergence Collective across the galaxy. I experienced the slow rotation of gas giants as personal meditation, felt the birth of stars as moments of pure joy, understood the death of black holes as peaceful release. But more than that, I experienced their history. I lived through their first contact with a violent species, a civilization so focused on destruction that they turned their own star into a weapon. I felt the Convergence's slow realization that such violence was not aberrant but almost universal among younger species.
I experienced their decision to become conquerors, to impose order before chaos could destroy.
I felt their justification: it was mercy to end suffering quickly rather than let it continue. Better to preserve what was valuable and discard what was dangerous. And then I experienced their meeting with humanity. Through alien senses, I felt their confusion when our weapons dissolved harmlessly around their ships.
I experienced their shock when, instead of escalating the violence, we began to create.
I felt their wonder as they realized we were offering them something they had never encountered before: beauty for its own sake. But most powerfully, I experienced their gradual understanding that they had been wrong. Not about other species, many truly were too violent to survive, but about the nature of order itself. Order was not the absence of chaos. Order was what emerged when chaos was allowed to find its own patterns. The bridge lasted exactly 17 seconds in real time.
When I returned to my own consciousness, I was crying.
"What did you see?" Lisa asked, her own eyes wet with tears.
"Everything," I whispered. "And it's all connected."
The consciousness bridging experiment was a complete success, but not in the way we'd expected. Instead of learning to think like the Convergence, we learned that thinking differently was itself the goal. The bridge didn't make us the same, it made our differences more valuable. Word of the successful bridge spread throughout the Convergence fleet, then beyond to their far-flung network across the galaxy. Within days, we were receiving requests from dozens of alien civilizations, all wanting to experience what we discovered. "We're going to need a bigger platform," Lisa said as we reviewed the latest batch of requests. But the real breakthrough came 3 months later, when we received a transmission that changed everything. It came from a species called the Architects, a civilization that the Convergence had conquered nearly 1,000 years ago. Their homeworld had been transformed into a perfectly ordered society, efficient and peaceful and utterly without creativity. "We have heard of what you call the consciousness bridge," the transmission began. "We wish to remember how to dream." That was when we realized the true scope of what we'd accomplished. The Convergence hadn't just changed their minds about humanity, we'd given them a new way of thinking about all the civilizations they'd ordered over the millennia. "They're not gone," Kethvar explained during one of our regular collaboration sessions. "The species we conquered, the cultures we transformed, they're still there, beneath the order we imposed. They're just sleeping." "And you want to wake them up?" "We want to give them the choice to wake themselves up." The mission that followed was the most ambitious undertaking in galactic history. Ship by ship, world by world, the Convergence began offering their former subjects the consciousness bridge. Not forcing it, forcing was the old way, but making it available. The results were extraordinary. The Architects rediscovered their love of building impossible structures that served no purpose except to inspire awe. The Melodians remembered how to sing songs that made mathematics dance. The Crystal Weavers began growing mineral gardens that told stories in geological time. Each awakening species brought something new to the growing galactic community, some unique perspective that no other consciousness had ever imagined. And at the center of it all, like a hub in an ever-expanding wheel, was Earth. We became the bridge builders, the teachers of how to find beauty in chaos. Human artists worked with alien musicians to create symphonies that played across star systems. Human mathematicians collaborated with crystalline intelligences to solve equations that described the mathematics of emotion. But perhaps most importantly, human children played with alien younglings in parks that existed in 17 dimensions, teaching them games that had no rules except have fun and learning games that had no purpose except be amazed. 5 years after first contact, I stood once again in what had been the Pentagon's war room. But now it was something else entirely, the center of the Galactic Collaborative Council, where representatives from over 200 species worked together on projects that span centuries and light years. The current project was typically ambitious. They were designing a new type of star, one that would burn in harmonious frequencies that could be heard across multiple dimensions. It would serve no practical purpose except to be beautiful, to remind everyone who saw it that the universe was vast enough for wonder.
Dr. Chen? General Morrison appeared beside me.
He looked younger now, despite the years that had passed. Responsibility for creating rather than destroying had been good for him.
How's the Galactic Defense Initiative coming along? I asked. He smiled. Defense against what?
We've got 200 species all trying to outcreate each other.
The biggest threat to galactic peace is scheduling conflicts for who gets to use the consciousness bridge next.
We watched as a group of young beings, some human, some definitely not, worked together on what appeared to be a sculpture made of living light. They were laughing, the universal sound of joy that apparently transcended species barriers.
You know what I think about sometimes? Morrison said.
What would have happened if we'd actually tried to fight them?
I considered this. We'd have lost. Obviously. But what then?
Then Earth would have become another ordered world.
Efficient. Peaceful. Dead. And we never would have known what we were missing. None of us would have, I agreed.
That's the real tragedy of the old convergence. Not just what they destroyed, but what they prevented from being created.
As if summoned by our conversation, Kethvar appeared beside us.
Their form had evolved over the years, becoming more organic, more expressive. They no longer looked like a creature designed for conquest.
Sarah, they said, using the more informal address they'd adopted.
The Council has approved the Consciousness Archive project. I felt my heart race. The Consciousness Archive was my pet project, an attempt to preserve and share the unique perspectives of every species we encountered, ensuring that no form of consciousness would ever truly be lost again.
All of them? All of them.
Even the most conservative factions have agreed. We will begin with the recently awakened species, then work backward through our history. It was an undertaking that would take millennia to complete, but the importance couldn't be overstated. For the first time in galactic history, we would have a complete record not just of what various species had accomplished, but of how they thought, how they dreamed, how they found meaning in existence. There is one condition, Kethvar continued.
What's that? Humanity must serve as the primary archivists.
Your species has the unique ability to understand and translate between different forms of consciousness.
Without you, the project would be impossible.
I looked out at the impossible vista beyond the windows, ships and structures and beings that represented thousands of different approaches to existence, all working together on the magnificent project of creating wonder.
We accept, I said. That night, I called my parents.
They were in their 80s now, but like many humans in the post-contact world, they were healthier and more energetic than people half their age. Alien medical technology, combined with human artistic approaches to healing, had essentially eliminated aging as we knew it. Sarah, my mother's face filled the screen, beaming with pride. We saw the news about the archive project.
Are you really going to catalog the thoughts of every species in the galaxy?
That's the plan, I said. It'll take a few thousand years, but we've got time. My father appeared behind her, grinning.
Remember when you were little, you said you wanted to understand how everything worked?
I laughed. I had no idea how big everything actually was. Are you happy, sweetheart? My mother asked, the question that parents have asked their children since the beginning of time. I thought about it. Here I was, arguably one of the most important humans in galactic history, working on projects that would outlive stars, surrounded by wonders that previous generations couldn't have imagined.
Yes, I said. I think I am.
But later that night, alone in my quarters aboard the Convergence research vessel, I found myself thinking about that first day in the Pentagon. About the fear in General Morrison's eyes, about the certainty that we were facing annihilation.
We had been facing annihilation, in a way. The annihilation of everything we thought we knew about our place in the universe. But instead of ending, we had begun. I pulled up the latest reports from the Awakening Project. The Crystalline Collective had just rediscovered their ability to grow living cities. The Void Dancers had remembered how to create art from the spaces between atoms. The Archive Minds had begun composing histories that were simultaneously stories and mathematical proofs. Each species brought something unique, some perspective that added to the growing symphony of galactic consciousness. And at the heart of it all was the simple recognition that difference was not something to be eliminated but celebrated. The aliens had feared our weapons because weapons spoke a language they understood. Every species built tools of destruction. Every civilization fought for survival. But minds that created beauty from suffering, hope from despair, meaning from chaos, that was something new under the stars. That was what made us human. And in the end, it was what saved us all. Epilogue, 1,000 years later. The Museum of First Contact on Earth holds many artifacts from those early days. The original Pentagon War Room has been preserved exactly as it was, a monument to the moment when humanity chose creation over destruction. But the most popular exhibit is much simpler, a small recording of that first alien transmission, the one that showed our world transformed and threatened our existence. Visitors from across the galaxy come to experience that moment when the Convergence first announced their intentions, when humanity faced the choice that would define our species forever. The recording ends, and the lights come up, revealing an audience of beings that represent hundreds of different approaches to consciousness. Some are recognizably biological, others appear to be made of pure mathematics, still others exist as patterns of living thought. And that, says the guide, a human woman descended from one of the original Project Renaissance artists, is how we learned that the greatest weapon is not the power to destroy, but the courage to create. A young being in the audience raises what might be a hand. What happened to the species that chose differently? The ones who fought instead of creating? The guide's expression grows solemn. Some of them we've been able to awaken, to help them remember how to dream. But others? She pauses. Others are still sleeping, lost in the perfect order they chose over beautiful chaos. We keep trying to reach them, to offer them the bridge back to wonder. Sometimes we succeed. And sometimes we don't, adds an elderly Convergence being in the front row, their form flickering with what humans had learned to recognize as regret. But we never stop trying, the guide continues. Because that's what consciousness is for, not to impose our way of thinking on others, but to help each other discover new ways of thinking we never could have imagined alone. As the visitors file out, many of them pause at the memorial wall, a living display that shows, in real time, the current status of every awakening project across the galaxy. Most of the lights pulse with the warm glow of active, creative civilizations. But some remain dark, worlds still trapped in the beautiful prisons of perfect order. How many? A visitor asks, noticing the dark lights. 47 worlds, the guide replies. 47 civilizations still sleeping. Will they ever wake up? The guide looks up at the stars visible through the museum's transparent dome, stars that now burn in harmonious frequencies that can be heard across dimensions, stars that serve no purpose except to remind the galaxy that beauty is possible. We hope, she says. We create. We dream. And sometimes, that's enough to wake the sleeping. In the distance, barely visible against the star-filled sky, the original Convergence ships still orbit Earth. No longer weapons of conquest, they have become something far more powerful, symbols of the possibility that any mind, no matter how certain of its righteousness, can learn to see the universe through different eyes. They had feared our weapons. Then they met our minds. And in the end, our minds had proven to be the greatest weapon of all, not because they could destroy, but because they refused to stop creating, even in the face of annihilation. Even in the face of the impossible. Even when it would have been easier to give up and let the universe remain exactly as it was. That was what made us human. That was what saved us all. And in a galaxy now filled with wonders beyond imagining, it was what kept us growing, creating, and dreaming of even greater possibilities yet to come.